No one in Kylera remembered when the sky had last belonged to everyone. We told our children stories of a time when mornings drifted over rooftops without a receipt, when nightfall was not an invoice delivered in the voice of a silver-tongued auctioneer, but in the city's ledger of living memory. The heavens were a commodity, and the minutes of sun and shade were liquid assets traded on the chronomarket. 5 bell tolls before each equinox, the gates of the Horizon Pavilion opened, and the oligarchs assembled in their sapphire balconies to bid. They wore prisms on their lapels that scattered the auction hall with miniature rainbows, small, deliberate mockeries of the spectrum most of us never saw in full. At the center dais, beneath a suspended mechanical orrery, stood the official broker of hours, Lady Averine Toll. Her ivory gavel could sell you noon for a month, if you could pay what noon was now worth. For the poor districts, Low Forge, Gutterfin, the Tangle, the results of those auctions were mercilessly simple. When day was sold to some consortium of bankers or thrill-seeking celebrities, the city's regulators siphoned the period of sunlight toward the elevated terraces where the rich lounged in brazen warmth. Down below, we were allotted counterfeit daylight, arrays of sodium lamps, whose color never quite figured out if it was sickly gold or funeral orange. They blazed ceaselessly because the real sun was busy tanning another class of skin. And when night went to the highest bidder, the same trick reversed. The wealthy reclined in curated darkness, gazing through glass ceilings at stars routed to their private coordinates by orbital mirrors, sipping luminescent cocktails, while we, the laboring majority, shivered beneath glaring bulbs so the assembly lines could run without pause. In Kylora, circadian rhythm was a sponsorship deal you had to afford. I was born in Low Forge, on a mezzanine of rusted catwalks wedged between 2 heat exhaust stacks. My mother named me Leora, which in the old speech means gift of light. She died by my 7th winter, her lungs devoured by the same soot that still bandages the horizon in gray gauze. My father, Jorek, spent his nights welding reinforcement ribs onto the artificial suns that kept our factories blistering. Though he worked beneath them, he never once felt their warmth. The lamps sat too high, and their brilliance produced more glare than heat. By 22, I had followed him into the trade as a filament engineer. It paid just enough to keep father in medicine and to rent a cubicle at the edge of the electrocloak, a shimmering veil that rose each dusk to hide the affluent tiers above us from our unwanted stares. Like the rest of Low Forge, I had grown resigned to the unchanging Amber Pall. But resignation does not mean absence of dreams. Dreams are simply rebellions that perform in secret. My rebellion began the night the broker announced the centennial auction, a complete decade of daylight, packaged in yearly tranches, to be sold in a single evening. 10 consecutive years without a real dawn for us, unless we found a way to steal it back. I first learned of the secret coaxial conduit while repairing an elevator gearhouse under Sector G. A mislaid blueprint showed a forgotten vertical shaft, labeled Oryx Subframe, crossing every stratum of the city like a needle through fabric. According to legend, the conduit once carried sunlight collected by heliotubes, distributing it equitably before the auctions corrupted all. Most engineers dismissed the diagram as myth. I saw potential. Over weeks, I traced the relic through maintenance tunnels that stank of ionized copper. Locked valves thwarted me until whispers of my prowling reached Ferris Reed, an illegal clocksmith. Ferris had been timing unauthorized sunsets for exhausted workers, programming the overhead lamps to dim for 14-minute breaks. He liked my audacity and my half-finished theories about the auric conduit. More importantly, he owned skeleton keys to half the city's pneumatic doors. Together, we discovered the truth. The conduit still functioned. At the heart of the system, buried beneath the pavilion, lay the Solaris diverter, an iris of reflective petals capable of routing the entire day's allotment anywhere on the grid. Currently, central regulators locked it to the registered coordinates of the winning bidders, but the diverter could be redirected if someone commandeered the control core during the auction itself. The instant the gavel fell and the energy streams reoriented. Such an infiltration presented two obstacles. First, the pavilion was a fortress of biometric gates, electrostatic floors, and mercenary sentinels. Second, even if we could reach the core, we needed capital to enter the auction as a legitimate bidder. Credentials granted you proximity to the dais, and proximity was essential. Capital, Ferris scoffed, polishing a gear with solvent. The one variable I cannot forge. Any bright ideas, Leora? I looked at my father's pill vials lined on a shelf and thought of time. Not the hours being sold, but the dwindling weeks until his lungs collapsed. Then I thought of the slum's only thriving economy. Wagers. Low Forge survived on betting slips from pit fights and rigged races. Luck enslaved us daily. Perhaps, for once, she could be bribed to freedom. I entered the drift run, a night-long hoverboard gauntlet that serpents along scaffolds 50 meters above ground. The purse for the champion, assuming survival, was 12 silver orbs, enough to purchase an auction seat in the cheapest skybox. I'd never raced professionally, but as a child, I'd welded rails for the course and memorized each lethal hairpin. When I told Father, he resisted with what frail breath he had left. Light shouldn't be gambled for, he rasped. It should be given. I kissed his forehead. Then let me gamble so I can give it back. The race began beneath lunar light, leased by a gemstone conglomerate. 40 riders launched from the platform, jets screaming violet. I navigated the opening maze cautiously, avoiding the early collisions that rained sparks over the crowd. By lap 5, 4 racers remained. My legs ached from micro-vibrations, but I remembered Mother's stories. Once, dawn smelled like bread crust and blossoms. I pushed forward. At the final bend, a titan named Mulgrim clipped my left thruster. My board bucked. For a breath, I hung above an abyss of smokestacks, then spun sideways into a maintenance cable I had secretly left unbolted during my night shift. The cable swung, flinging me back onto the track ahead of Mulgrim. I crossed first. The crowd howled, some in rage at lost bets, others in shock. The silver orbs felt heavier than lead when I poured them onto Ferris's work table. "One ticket to daylight, please," I said, exultation trembling through me. Preferably with a view of the dais. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 demanded allies beyond the smog canopy. People who walked in real daylight, yet carried grievances sharp enough to pierce their own privilege. We found one in Morel Row, a scion of a shipping dynasty, kept just far enough from inheriting the throne that spite colored her every smile. Morel attended charity galas, mostly to antagonize her parents. When Ferris and I cornered her in a rose garden atop the Sunspire, we explained our plot. She listened, turning a wine glass by its stem. "You intend to subvert the entire chrono market with an outdated conduit and a racing trophies entry fee?" she said. "Yes," I replied. Her dimples appeared, fault lines in a regime of etiquette. "Then it would be a shame if you failed for lack of wardrobe." She tossed us invitations sealed with the Rowe family crest and the access codes to an unattended service corridor that burrowed beneath the pavilion's foundation. Auction night arrived, cloaked in a crimson aurora, drummed up by the entertainment committee. The Horizon Pavilion's amphitheater glittered like an overturned goblet of jewels. Ferris, dressed as my valet, trailed a step behind while I presented Morel's signet ring to security. They bowed us inward without question. Inside, the tonnage of stolen photons was palpable. Light refracted off chandeliers into ecstatic constellations. The dais shone like a crown. Yet anywhere my gaze strayed, I saw only division. Tiers of velvet where laughter spilled freely, and below, the memory of districts where laughter cost too much breath. Lady Averine Toll began in her lilting soprano. 1 decade of primary daylight, commencing first dawn of year 301, to be sold in increments of annual allotments. Bidding will start at 6 million soul marks for year 1. Paddles flicked upward, prices vaulted. I forced myself to track the rising numbers, even as my pulse scrambled. Ferris, hidden at the rear of our box, synchronized a pocket chrono to the auctioneer's cadence. When year 5 closed at 9 million, Lady Toll paused for a celebratory flourish. That was our cue. Through the lavatory adjoining our suite, we slipped into the service corridor, descending a spiral of chilled air that smelled of marble dust. At the bottom, the shaft opened into the Solaris diverter chamber. The machine floated within a cage of sapphire pylons, an iron lotus rotating slowly. Cables glowed with waiting daylight, in stasis until the final gavel. Ferris approached the control lectern and connected a brass cipher jack he had spent nights crafting. "The moment year 10 sells," he whispered, "I override the routing coordinates to null vector, which defaults to citywide distribution for safety tests. Every district gets actual sunrise until regulators reassert control." "How long will that take?" 4 hours, maybe 6 if the bureaucrats panic. We shared a look. 4 hours of true sun was more than some children in Low Forge had seen in their lifetime. The 8th year passed under Hammerfall, then 9th. As bidding began for the climactic year, a hush settled, as though the crowd collectively inhaled capital. A man I recognized, Dorian Vey, master of the banking syndicate who owned our factory, offered 14 million soul marks. No one countered. Lady Toll raised her gavel. "Sold." The chamber vibrated. Luminous streams surged through the conduits above us, heat blossoming against my cheeks. Ferris's fingers danced. 30 seconds, he said. Lines of code scrolled across the lectern's prism display. Then red alarm glyphs flashed. "Someone's contesting my access." "Can you hold them?" I asked. He gritted his teeth. "Working." I heard boots. The far door burst open. Mercenaries in navy armor. Morel stepped from behind them, wrists bound by a plascord. Betrayal jolted through me like raw current. The lead guard leveled a scatter pistol. "Leora of Lowforge," he announced. "By order of the Chronarch Council, you are under arrest for sabotage." Before he finished, Morel wrenched her arms downward, the cord snapping like cheap ribbon. She jammed an electro-flare into the guard's visor. Light exploded. He staggered. She kicked him into another. "Go!" she yelled. Ferris shouted that the system had locked him out entirely. They were overriding every gate. In desperation, I ran to the diverter's maintenance ladder. At its apex, a single manual valve, ancient, neglected by software, allowed emergency orientation adjustments. It was designed to nudge the beam a fraction for calibration, but if flung wide, it might jam the pedals and force a fail-safe dispersion. I began to crank. The wheel shrieked, flakes of oxidation slicing my palms. Below, Ferris fought code. Morel grappled 2 guards. Alarms crescendoed. The diverter's pedals trembled. I thought of father's blistered hands, of children squinting at photos of stars they'd never seen, of mother whispering that light belonged to no one. I gave the wheel one last savage turn. A sound like a thunderclap ripped through the chamber as the pedals slammed their limiters. Cables flashed white. The diverter released its hoarded daylight in a fracture of beams that pierced walls, ceilings, the city itself. A shockwave knocked me from the ladder. I tumbled, world swirling, and landed in Ferris's arms as sparks cascaded like molten confetti. Above us, the artificial suns cut out. For the first time since my memory began, darkness, true, solemn darkness, fell over Lowforge. It lasted 3 heartbeats, and then there came the dawn. It started as a thread of gold unspooling across the slum rooftops, lighting corrugated metal like polished bronze. Windows flared with color. Chimneys exhaled clouds, touched rose. A rumble of voices rolled through alleys. Astonishment, laughter, some wild crying. For 4 hours, the auric conduit poured genuine daylight over every tier indiscriminately. Workers shut down machines to stare upward. Children chased their own shadows, ecstatic to discover such things existed. In Pavilion Heights, the wealthy found themselves equally illuminated, but not exclusively. Their monopoly of light dissolved into community property, and to many that was worse than darkness. Some screamed at regulators, demanding refunds. Others, including a few who had never considered their fortune theft, simply stood at their balconies, bewildered and oddly moved by the chorus rising from below. Ferris, Morell, and I did not witness the broad spectacle. Security teams recaptured the diverter room within minutes. We were bound, sedated, and thrown into a transport drone destined for black glass prison. Fortune, however, was not done betting. The drone never reached the penitentiary. Somewhere over the River Ash, a volley of rockets clipped its propulsion fins. When I woke, Lowforge partisans were unstrapping me. Morell had orchestrated the ambush. Apparently, she had friends among sky paredes impressed by anyone willing to fight their parents with stolen sunbeams. Ferris emerged coughing from smoke, grinning as if we'd missed our intended stop at a carnival rather than a prison. We hid within a labyrinth of abandoned aqueducts, while the city convulsed. The regulators could not undo the structural damage without dismantling the diverter for weeks, perhaps months. Meanwhile, every sunrise threatened to repeat unless they repaired the old calibrations. They tried silence, then propaganda, then force. Yet once people have tasted sunlight, the palate refuses substitutes. Protests ignited. Workers walked out, sitting in streets to bathe in morning rays. Even some guardians swapped banners, deciding they preferred the rhythm of honest skies to the schedules of profiteers. Father watched the revolution from our tiny balcony. When I finally reached him, half frantic he might have died during my absence, I found him coatless in the open air. His skin warmed to a color I had never seen on him. Tears leaked down the wrinkles beside his eyes. "I woke," he said, "and thought it was a dream. But the dream had heat." I hugged him until his coughing fit ended. Then I told him everything. The conduit, the sabotage, the unknown future. When I expected scolding, he surprised me with a faint laugh. "You gambled," he wheezed, "so you could give the light away. Your mother would say that is what a gift means." Regimes collapse slowly, like ice pillars under morning thaw. The Chronarch Council filed injunctions, but with the diverter offline they could auction only fragments of daylight, rerouted via hastily erected satellites. Those lots sold poorly. Demand now included the poor, who were learning the price of persistence is cheaper than the cost of obedience. In newly formed assemblies, citizens debated how to nationalize the chrono market, how to inscribe the sky as a commons no charter could sell. Our faces appeared on wanted screens, yet each day more walls carried mural versions of us lauded as the dawn thieves. Some nights I lay awake, heart drumming with dread. But dawn always returned, unbought, and with it, courage. One evening, while patrols searched alleys for us, we met in the roof garden of an unfinished library. The horizon pulsed with lanterns and campfires, where communities once segregated by darkness now gathered under stars that belonged to them again. Ferris tuned a pocket radio to a pirate broadcast reciting poems about real mornings. Morel sipped contraband champagne, her rebellious grin a permanent fixture. "What's next?" she asked, stretching beneath nebulae no longer for sale. I held out my hand, where flakes of rust from the diverter valve still lodged beneath nails. "We finish what we started. Day and night, both. No more auctions." "We'll need a new calendar," Ferris mused. "One not denominated in credits." "We'll need vigilance," I added. "They will try to take it back." Morel raised her glass. "Then here's to vigilance, and to the only stock that appreciates when shared." We drank to that, though Father could not share the toast. He slept in our flat, lungs calmer, bathed in moonlight that owed nobody interest. Somewhere beyond the river, Lady Averine Toll might have been drafting new sales pitches, but the city was listening to others now. The clamor of factory doors unhinged, the roar of streets singing to the sunrise. In Calora, the auctions had ended with a broken gavel echoing around an empty pavilion. Light and darkness still alternated, but no hammer set their price. They returned to the ancient rhythm older than markets and greed, claimed by every soul who dared lift their head. And each morning, when light spilled into Lowforge, gilding the soot into sudden gold, I remembered the night I twisted that valve and felt, perhaps for the first time, exactly like my name, Gift of Light, given back to those who had never stopped deserving it.